this complete cycle for the world, to give you a time scale on that, bear in mind that started in 1857. And so here's where we were about 3 or 4 years ago. This was proved reserves in here, which would add up to about here. And the estimated peak would occur about 1995, and we go into the decline. That middle 80% again is spread from the 60s, the late 60s, up till a little over 20, beyond 2020, or it's computed out here about 56 years. That assumes an orderly evolution. That says that a child born, say, within the last 10 years will probably see the world consume most of its oil if he lives a normal life.
In his lifetime.
Today, Marion King Hubbert is best known as the Shell oil researcher who gained notoriety in the 1950s for predicting that the U.S. would achieve its peak production of petroleum by 1970, and that almost all of the planet's oil supplies would be exhausted by 2020. This peak oil theory, still sometimes referred to as Hubbert's peak, was, like everything else generated by big oil, a conveniently crafted lie, designed to habituate the market to artificial scarcity and thus keep oil prices high. Hubbert's prediction was not based on any empirical data from any oil field, but instead relied on Hubbert's incorrect guesses about remaining oil reserves and employed a heuristic tool to model production. As Hubbert's protege and colleague at Shell Oil, Kenneth DeFaze, conceded years later, the numerical methods that Hubbert used to make his prediction are not crystal clear. Today, 44 years later, my guess is that Hubbert, like everyone else, reached his conclusion first, and then searched for raw data and methods to support his conclusion. Shortly before his death in 1989, Hubbert himself admitted that when he showed his peak oil paper to Shell's managing director before presenting it to his colleagues, the director had told him not to go overboard with his estimates of oil reserves, pointing specifically to L.G. Weeks, a rival geophysicist who had estimated reserves to be much higher, and thus the impending threat of undersupply and the need for high oil prices to be much weaker. But although today Hubbert is remembered almost exclusively for his peak oil thesis, he was in fact involved in a much larger, lifelong project, helping to codify and incorporate a movement that, much like eugenics, was wildly popular nearly a century ago, fell out of favor in polite society, and yet continues today under other names. That movement was called Tecnocracy.
Hello, I'm Arvid Peterson, and this is the first of a two-part presentation on Tecnocracy, an alternative social system. These programs are not intended to entertain or amuse you, nor are they meant to scare you. We are making a new approach. It is not political, financial, philosophical, legal, religious, or moral. It is a technological approach. Tecnocracy is the scientific answer to America's social problems. And Tecnocracy is a new design for social operation that is based upon science. It is the vehicle by which we can move into a new era for better living.
Tecnocracy billed itself as a social movement, a philosophy, a scientific solution to political and economic problems, and a new way of ordering the world. But at base, it is an idea for a new international economic order, one to be designed and managed down to the most minute detail by a select few, the technocrats.
Tecnocracy was defined very succinctly in 1938 by their own publication, the Technocrat magazine. And they call it a system of scientific engineering of, society. They saw themselves as a merger between hard science and social science, which really is an oxymoron. Social science is not really a science, in my opinion. But they really believed that. So they believed that they could take their scientific method that they used in the hard sciences and apply it to society. They also believed that they alone were the only ones that could run society correctly as a result of technology having come in and changed the fabric of society. They hated politicians. They hated the establishment, the organization of society the way it was, because it was not efficient. It was not, conservation-based, if you will, to conserve resources. And so they just kind of took it upon themselves to define an economic model that would replace capitalism and free enterprise. And that's exactly what it was, replacement economic system.
Drawing on Henry Saint-Simon's call for a scientifically organized socialist system, the positivism and secular humanism of Auguste Comte, and the principles of scientific management propounded by Frederick Taylor, the technocratic movement emerged from the same environment of progressivism, positivism, and social Darwinism that birthed eugenics. Just as the eugenicists believed the human race could be improved through selective breeding controlled and administered by a small group of scientists and their billionaire backers, so too did the technocrats believe that they could improve the social and economic conditions of humanity by controlling and administering society. And, happily enough for the oligarchs, the technocrats would improve the world by replacing money with energy certificates. Led by the eccentric revolutionary economist and sociologist Thorstein Veblen, the technocratic movement that formed around Veblen's New School for Social Research and Technical Alliance attracted both engineers and serious researchers like King Hubbard and Buckminster Fuller, and fellow eccentrics like Howard Scott. Scott, a mysterious man of uncertain background, established himself in New York City at the end of World War I and came to be seen as a bohemian engineer. In 1920, he went to work for the Wobblies as a research director, and the following year he founded the Technical Alliance, a group of engineers and scientists centered around Columbia University who, as a forerunner to the technocracy movement, advocated for a society run by scientists and engineers. In 1932, the charismatic and well-spoken Scott managed to attach himself to Walter Raudenstrauch, a professor at Columbia and the founder of the university's Department of Industrial Engineering. With a common interest in technocracy, the two became friends and allies. It was through Raudenstrauch that Scott was able to approach the president of Columbia, Nicholas Murray Butler, for permission to use the university's facilities. Butler, always on the lookout for the cutting edge of progressivism, was swayed by the technocratic ideas, and soon Scott's Committee on Technocracy was operating out of the basement of Hamilton Hall. When Butler let word slip about the next big idea being cooked up in the basement of his university, technocracy became a sensation. It was lauded in the press. Scott became a sought-after speaker, and there was even a dance named after the movement. It was at Columbia that Scott met King Hubbert, and the two, an unlikely pair of serious-minded researcher and eccentric revolutionary, immediately hit it off. Their stint together at Columbia was about to come to an abrupt end, but their association would last for decades and help give birth to ideas that would eventually transform the world.
Technocracy really got recognized when it was at Columbia. We'll talk in a minute. They didn't last there very long because, as it turned out, one of the promoters of technocracy, Howard Scott, turned out to be a fraud. He was kind of the main spokesman for the movement, and he pumped up his resume like so many people do today, unfortunately. He pumped it up and basically just lied about his past, his educational past. And they all assumed he had a degree in some advanced engineering, whatever, and he knew all the buzzwords. But some sharp reporter did some investigative research on him and said, I can't find where this guy graduated anywhere. And when Columbia found out that the guy was a fraud, they realized Butler's ego got involved and says, man, these people have played me. And so he kicked them all out. Just kaboom, drop kicked him right out of it. He said, get out of my building. And they all left and scattered. And the technocrats that were left at Columbia, there were several of them that were professors at Columbia at the time, they just zipped their lips, shut up, went back to work, figured out, I want to keep my job. I'm just going to, not ever mention technocracy again. It didn't mean they stopped believing, but they didn't talk about it for a very, very long time at Columbia.
Disgraced, evicted from Columbia, and with the Committee on Technocracy disbanded almost as quickly as it had come together, Scott found himself at a personal low. Penniless and with an old debt having caught up to him, he had only one person he could rely on: M. King Hubbert. Hubbert let Scott live in his Greenwich Village apartment and paid out of his own pocket to file the Articles of Incorporation for Technocracy, Inc., a new membership organization that would carry on the principles of technocracy. The first step, of course, was to define precisely what those principles were. Hubbert got to work penning the Technocracy Study Course, the Bible of the technocracy movement. In it, Hubbert laid out the vision of an abundance of physical wealth on a continental scale for the use of all continental citizens, which, he warned, can only be accomplished by a continental technological control, a governance of function, a technate. The technocratic system was to be structured around a new monetary paradigm, one based not on dollars and cents, but energy certificates representing the nation's net energy expenditure. These certificates would be denominated in joules and issued based on a net energy budget deemed appropriate by the technocratic state's governing scientists. Citizens would be issued an equal share of the nation's certificates and make their purchases with them, and the information about these purchases would be relayed back to the central planning body for analysis. By this method, the technocrats could, in the words of one proponent, create a thermodynamically balanced load of production and consumption, thereby doing away with unemployment, debt, and social injustice. In the Technocracy Study Course, Hubbert, like a good technocrat, laid out the exact conditions that would need to be met for this vision to come to pass. According to him, technocracy would require all energy usage and all consumer spending throughout the nation to be calculated and registered on a continuous and instantaneous basis, a 24/7 inventory of all production and consumption, a complete registry of all products available for sale, where they were produced, how much energy was expended in their production, and where and when they were sold, and finally, a specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. Hubbert's vision was not just that of a totalitarian society, in which every detail of every interaction was recorded and reported to a central authority, but, for the 1930s, the concept of continuously and instantaneously updated registries of every good in the economy was not just audacious, but borderline insane. Nevertheless, suffering through the Great Depression, the American people were willing to listen to any ideas to replace the current system that had so obviously failed them, no matter how outlandish. Technocracy Inc. did attract a following, swelling into the tens of thousands later in the decade. But Scott's eccentric ways, compelling members to salute him in public and delivering rambling radio addresses, ultimately led to the movement's long, slow decline in relevance. Hubbert never repudiated the concept of technocracy, but when he joined Shell as a researcher, he resigned his position on the board of Technocracy Inc. and avoided direct mention of the organization. The technocrats had sketched the outlines of a completely ordered and controlled society, one in which energy is the fundamental measure of value and all consumption and production is meticulously analyzed by a central authority. Technocracy Inc. still exists to this day, but the language and thinking of the technocrats has, like eugenics, undergone a metamorphosis. And, also like eugenics, the name may have faded into obscurity, but the idea lives on in the hands of the oligarchs.
Would you live in a greener lifestyle if you could make money from it?
That may be possible if a government proposal for personal carbon emissions allowances is implemented. Under the scheme, everyone in the UK would be allocated an annual carbon allowance.
Stored electronically, rather like a supermarket loyalty card, points would be deducted every time we buy or use non-renewable energy. For example, using electricity to power appliances in the home.
Or travelling somewhere by plane.
Or even buying petrol for your car on the forecourt.
Now, any points left over could then be sold back to a central bank. Are you still with us? And people who need more, like motorists who had used their allocations, could then pay for a top-up.
Carbon rationing, carbon trading, carbon taxes, cap and trade. Just as the technocrats of old envisioned a new economic order based on energy and governed by the dictates of scientists and engineers, so, too, does this modern form of technocracy envision an economic order in which energy is budgeted, priced, and traded by intergovernmental panels of scientists and the political caste that grows up around these institutions.
The Environmental Protection Agency is not a frivolous agency. It is created to yes, to regulate carbon dioxide emissions. And I have been saying to the West Virginia Coal Association, which for the most part doesn't believe in climate science. They don't believe there's a climate problem. And I have been saying to them for a number of years that that's wrong. In my judgment, the science is true. The science is unequivocally true. And that there is a price to carbon in their future. I said this a couple of months ago. There's a price to carbon in their future.
But I believe that the cap and trade approach is the essential first step, partly because it is the only basis upon which we can envision a truly global agreement, because it's very difficult to imagine a harmonized global tax.
A carbon tax, or any other way of putting a carbon price, is actually, from an economic point of view, the most effective and efficient way to do this. Okay, you can regulate and you can do, all kinds of things, but nothing is as strong a market signal to the private sector as a carbon price, whether that be a carbon tax or whether it be a cap and trade, which is what California is doing, or any of the other measures that ultimately give you a carbon price. But that is the simplest, cleanest, most powerful signal. So if that's possible, I'm with you.
These measures are sold to the public as a way of penalizing the big oil interests that have spent the last century monopolizing the world's key resources and plundering the earth in the pursuit of profit. What they do not understand, because it has been deliberately obscured, is that it is these very interests that have been instrumental in creating these schemes in the first place.
It's my understanding that back in 1997, when you were vice president, Enron's CEO, Ken Lay, was involved in discussions with you at the White House about helping develop this type of policy, this trading scheme. And is that accurate? Is it inaccurate? It's been reported.
I don't know, but I met with Ken Lay, as lots of people did, before anybody knew that he was a crook.
Right, and clearly you can see why so many of us are concerned about this type of cap-and-trade energy tax that would be literally turning over this country's energy economy.
I didn't know him well enough to call him Kenny Boy.
Well, but you knew him well enough to help devise this trading scheme.
In the early 1990s, Enron, the disgraced Texas-based energy trading company that turned out to be a complete fraud, spearheaded the EPA's $20 billion cap-and-trade program for sulfur dioxide, promptly becoming the largest trader in that market. As a follow-up, the company, led by Ken Lay, began lobbying the Clinton administration, and particularly Vice President Al Gore, to create a similar market for carbon dioxide. Making lavish contributions to environmental groups like the Nature Conservancy, whose climate change project argued for restrictions on carbon emissions, Enron then hired Christopher Horner, a former staffer on Senator Joe Lieberman's Environment Committee, to lobby for an international treaty that would restrict emissions and allow for trading in emission rights. They were joined in this quest by Goldman Sachs, the infamous Wall Street investment bank known today for the revolving door between the firm and the U.S. Treasury, who helped establish the Chicago Climate Exchange as the first North American emissions trading platform. In 2004, Al Gore, who has spent the last 2 decades lobbying for the creation of a carbon trading market, founded Generation Investment Management, an investment management partnership that sells carbon offsets, with David Blood, the CEO of Goldman Sachs Asset Management, who stepped down from his position with Goldman to go into business with Gore. By the end of the decade, Gore was already being hailed as a candidate to become the world's first carbon billionaire. Gore himself is an oligarch. His father, Al Gore Sr., was a close friend of Armand Hammer, the oil tycoon behind Occidental Petroleum. After losing a Senate race in 1970, Gore's father went to work for Hammer at Occidental for $500,000 a year. Over the course of his career, Gore Sr. accumulated hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Occidental stock, which fell into the hands of the executor of his estate at the time of his death, none other than his son, Al Gore. The Occidental connection does not end there. Discovering zinc ore on their Tennessee estate, Hammer bought the Gore's land and sold it back to them with a claim on the mining rights, complete with a $20,000 annual payment, which also went to Gore after his father's death. In 2013, Gore earned $100 million from the Qatari government on the sale of his current TV venture, and then was surprised when reporters were more interested in discussing his oil money than his new book on the global warming cause. But Gore's story is only an example of a larger phenomenon. In 2006, the United States Climate Action Partnership was formed to create a call for action to cut down on carbon emissions. It drafted the blueprint for legislative action, which became the basis for the American Clean Energy and Security Act, seeking to create an emissions trading regime modeled on the European Union emission trading scheme. And the members of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership? A who's who of the oligarchy, including BP, ConocoPhillips, and General Motors. Carbon taxes and carbon trading have proven to be a hard sell for an increasingly wary public, but with the Paris Agreement of 2015, the world saw the biggest step yet towards this technocratic future of energy control and carbon rationing. No surprise, then, that the summit itself was sponsored by and prominently supported by Big Oil.
What's your position, and what message would you send to the president?
Well, we have been clear in our support of the climate agreement in Paris. We were part of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which is 10 of the big companies in the world who are working towards projects and technologies that are needed. I think we all want to know how the formula will work, but I think the concept of Paris needs to stay in everybody's mind on the issues of we've got to transition the world to a lower carbon forms of energy. I have no doubt it will happen.
Yes, I think that what happened in Paris is very, very important. And Mr. Ban Ki-moon underlined that yesterday, that is important not only for the planet, not only for us citizens, not only for our children, it is important for the business.
But using energy as the new metric of value for the post-carbon economy is just one element of the neo-technocratic vision. When Hubbert wrote his Technocracy study course, he made it clear that technocracy could not come to fruition without 24/7 surveillance of all energy usage and a continuous stream of data about all goods being produced by and consumed by society. But whereas in the 1930s such a system must have seemed like a delusional flight of fancy, today it is already being implemented.
By now, you may have heard the term Internet of Things. Sounds interesting, but what does the Internet of Things actually mean? IoT is an evolution of mobile, home, and embedded applications that are being connected to the Internet, integrating greater compute capabilities and using data analytics to extract meaningful information. Billions of devices will be connected to the Internet, and soon, hundreds of billions of devices. As related devices connect with each other, they can become an intelligent system of systems. And when these intelligent devices and systems of systems share data over the cloud and analyze it, they can transform our businesses, our lives, and our world in countless ways.
Why create a smart city? Well, smart cities are more responsive to citizens, and they help reduce environmental impact.
They're more cost-effective and they're safer.
Smart cities make people happier and more connected to their community.
Cities are becoming increasingly instrumented. Sensors that enable the capture of all sorts of data are being integrated across city systems, providing critical information on city activity and operations. Sensors on a bridge transmit data on its physical condition. A camera on a freeway relays traffic flow, and digital meters record water and energy usage in real time. Mobile and social channels enable local governments and citizens to communicate with each other, creating yet another source of useful data. Advanced analytics can now readily identify trends and patterns within these massive amounts of data. Information can be integrated, gathered and shared via dashboards, visualizations, and alerts to facilitate understanding and collaboration across systems, agencies, and groups.
This department store in Bundang has introduced a new way to shop. With its smart shopper system, customers pick up a small scanner and tag the items they want to buy. It eliminates the hassle of having to carry heavy items in a shopping basket, not to mention the hassle of having to get them home. After you pay for the items at an automated kiosk, the goods are delivered right to your home.
Before, I had to wait in long lines at the checkout, but now I can use the Smart Shopper system to pay. It's really quite convenient.
Aside from their convenience to shoppers, the system also helps stores gather data about their customers' shopping habits.
The smart home communicates with the grid and enables consumers to manage their electricity usage. By measuring a home's electricity consumption more frequently through a smart meter, utilities can provide their customer with much better information to manage their electricity bills. Inside the smart home, a home area network, or HAN, connects smart appliances, thermostats, and other electric devices to an energy management system.
With the smart meters, they'll be able to tell exactly what's going on in your home at down to the microsecond, based upon 24/7 communication with all of your appliances, which will also in the future, if this goes through fully and if there's not a public backlash, all of your appliances will need to have a wireless transmitter on them, and they'll need to be, certified under some smart, program. So this means that not only, just stepping aside from one moment to the health issue, this means that not only is your smart meter emitting on average of 13,000 microwave pulses per day, but every one of your appliances is going to be doing the same thing because it will be needed to be communicating with the smart meter itself. So that is a serious concern. We'll get into that a little bit later. But as far as the privacy issue, just diving right in, the current CIA director, David Petraeus, was quoted as saying, we're going to use smart appliances to spy on you. And it's almost like, and he was later down in the article, and it's very just putting it out there. It's kind of like, it's getting to a point now, James, and I'm sure you're seeing this, is like, it's just getting more and more in your face. And it's kind of like this collective force of the controllers, and they're kind of saying, this is what we're going to do, and what are you going to do about it? So they're almost challenging us in a sort of, schoolhouse bully sort of way. What are you going to do about it?
Once again, we are being asked to believe that the vested corporate interests that are rolling these technologies out in a coordinated fashion are doing so for the benefit of the public. That this technology is to help save the Earth. And once again, we are being duped. The technocratic agenda is not about saving the Earth. It is not about helping the public. It is not even about making money. It is about complete control over every aspect of our daily life.
So there's two levels, and the way I look at technocracy, there's two levels operating at the same time. There's the operational side of it that has to do with things like smart grid, that have to do with things like various technocratic innovations. Surveillance is another big hot button for technocracy. These are operational issues. From a strategic point of view, which is where the Rockefeller type people operate, it's a different view of where it's headed. On an operational level, it's headed towards scientific dictatorship. And you don't have to be a visionary to figure that one out, anymore. You don't. It's there. But on a strategic basis, what's happening is that there's a massive resource grab going on all over the planet. And when I say resource grab, you have to put yourself in Rockefeller's shoes and the banker's shoes, the Rothschild shoes and whatever, and say, what do you do when money wears out? What do you do? When you sucked all the value you can out of the monetary systems you created, what's left? Well, you and I don't think about those sort of things because we don't have that much money. But these people at the top, especially the bankers, I'm sure they stay up at night thinking, what's after money? What comes after money? The Rockefeller family, especially, has always been a resource-intensive family. That's what oil was all about in the first place. It was a resource, and they understood that energy would be the most important factor in the world over any other type of resource. They understood that. That's why they wanted to create a monopoly over energy. Well, today, as money has been sucked dry, The only thing left to do is to make a grab for the resources themselves. And that's what sustainable development is all about, is taking the resources of the world away from you and me, away from private companies that aren't part of the clique, if you will, and putting them into a global common trust that will be managed by them for their benefit. This is really nothing more than neo-feudalism, again, where the resources are owned by a few and everybody else gets to operate with those resources at their pleasure and discretion.
The technocrats and the functionaries of this agenda, like Hubbert and his colleagues in Tecnocracy Inc., pioneered this idea because they believed that they, the technocrats and engineers, would be able to solve the world's problems. But the oligarchs and bankers who funded their ideas into existence did so because it would help them to become the rulers of a system so perfectly crafted that no resource, no commodity, no person would be beyond their control. And now, in the 21st century, that technocratic vision is coming into view. And it is being helped along by a public that believes the post-carbon future represents the end of the oligarchy. They couldn't be more wrong. Oil. It was never about oil. It was about control. Control over energy and production and consumption. Control over the world's resources. Control over the population. Control over humanity itself.
Every other thing that the elite put forward is nothing more than a pretext for what they've been after since the beginning. So as I cover in Tragedy and Hope 101, I discuss this concept of the elite seeking to rule all habitable portions of the world. And they don't want to secure that so that they can then have it taken away from them. So they come up with pretexts that they can sell both to the public but also to the administrative class that justifies what it is that they're trying to do. They need to. So whether it's global warming hysteria, or whether it's technocracy, or whether it's Agenda 2030, or whether it's eugenics, there's a common thread that runs through all of this. And that common thread is the desire to consolidate and exercise coercive power. In the case of eugenics, it's the desire to consolidate and exercise the ultimate power, which is the power over who ultimately is going to live or die, who will be permitted to exist in the gene pool from here forward.
The picture is bleak, and made all that much bleaker by the fact that so many have been duped into believing that the oligarchs' ultimate agenda, an agenda of technocratic control, micromanagement of our daily lives, and, ultimately, the elimination of the cannon fodder from the gene pool, is in fact in their own best interest. The oligarchs, shielded behind their smokescreen of sustainable development and post-carbon economy, are closer than ever before to achieving their true goal of total control. But if the people perish from lack of knowledge of this agenda, then understanding is the first step toward the solution.
It's hard to fight an enemy that you don't recognize or can't see. That's the biggest problem in the world today, in my opinion, is that people have no visibility whatsoever of this issue. They've covered their tracks so well that nobody can see them. How can you fight an enemy that you don't know? I think the famous Chinese general Sun Tzu brought that up hundreds of years ago. You can't fight an enemy that you don't know. first we have to recognize who the enemy is.
Well, big oil conquered the world because monopolization of all resources on the planet is the goal. And to get to that goal, you have to monopolize the energy aspects of people around the planet, but you also have to control the food, the actual energy for the human beings whose energy you want to control. If you control those two aspects, the green revolution and the gene revolution, then you're able to control the entire planet, every resource on it, and basically extinguish freedom for the rest of history. So how big oil conquered the world was already done in the movie. Why big oil conquered the world has to do with the complexities of controlling populations, not for money, because these are the people that print money out of nothing and charge us for it. So really, it's a study of power. So why did they want to do this to the rest of us? Because they could, and because we were tolerant so far and haven't resisted enough to make it stop. So that's where we find ourselves today, becoming informed on the history so that we can actually plot our course in the future to map or chart out a course and actually get to some place that resembles cognitive liberty and physical freedom and justice for all.
Big oil, big pharma, genetic engineering, the green revolution, the environmental movement, eugenics, technocracy. Not one person in 1,000 can detail the historical development of these ideas or the people and the agenda that connects them. But if you have watched this documentary, you are now that one person in 1,000. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? As the oligarch's quest for total control comes into view, it's difficult to remember that it all started a century and a half ago with Devil Bill Rockefeller, a 2-bit snake oil salesman always on the run from the last group of marks he managed to con. In a way, nothing has changed but the scope of the con and the number of marks who have fallen for the routine. But now that you know the snake oil that is being fed to the public, the only question that matters is, are you going to drink it?
Down in Pennsylvania, there is plenty oil, they say. Petroleum, petroleum, we must all have some. The oily fever, don't you see, infects most every live Yankee. From north, from east and west they come for petroleum oil. Oil, 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 oh petroleum. Oil, 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 petroleum.
Hello, this is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, the writer, director, narrator, and creator of the documentary you've just been watching, Why Big Oil Conquered the World. And if you have just watched this documentary all the way through, as well as the previous documentary on how big oil conquered the world, then as I say towards the end, you really are now better informed than the vast majority of the public on these issues and on the history of this picture that I'm trying to paint here. And the real question is, what are we going to do with this information? Well, the first thing I'd like to encourage you to do is to go to CorbettReport.com/bigoil. That is the destination where you will be able to find audio and video copies of the entire documentary, How Big Oil and Why Big Oil Conquered the World. All there for your free download and perusal, and as a handy link that you can share with others if and when you're ready to start sharing this information. But perhaps the most important part of CorbettReport.com/bigoil is the hyperlinked transcript. Everything that is said in this documentary, including sources to all the source documents from which this information came, is in that transcript. It is a very important tool for people to use when you are ready to start delving into this information in greater detail, because as much ground as I was able to cover in the 3 hours of this combined documentary, there's still so much more that needs to be said and so much more information that helps to color in this image that I've only sketched the broad outlines of here. And the transcript, along with the hyperlinks to source documentation, is a good way to start filling in the different pieces of this puzzle. But it doesn't end there, and I'm not going to end the story there, because there are I could have easily made several documentaries instead of just this one and trying to condense it all into one. There's so much more that needs to be said, and certain things that only appear in the documentary for 1 or 2 minutes can and should be developed into entire hour-long explorations. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing in the coming weeks and months. I'm going to be further developing some of the ideas that are introduced here and some of the characters and history, and fleshing them out in podcast episodes on CorbettReport.com, where we'll explore these issues in much greater detail. So please stay tuned for that. And as I say, once you've started getting into this research and looking at some of the source documents, and you are familiar with this material and you want to share it with others, then CorbettReport.com/bigoil is the place to go and the place to send people to for that exploration. Other ways that you can help with this work, rather than simply spreading the information, which is the first and foremost and most important thing, but also I will be doing interviews on this subject and on this documentary. So if you have a favorite radio program or podcast or whatever it is that you listen to or enjoy, and you'd like to hear me on there being interviewed about this, please do send your suggestions into those various hosts to have me on, and that would be appreciated. The other thing you can do is to get physical hard copies of this, because there are people out there who don't trust anything they see on the internet. But if it's on a physical disc, they'll be more receptive to it. Well, that's fine. And other people just want a physical hard copy of it. Well, you can purchase a physical hard copy of the documentary, both How Big Oil Conquered the World and Why Big Oil Conquered the World. They're available in a 2 DVD set that is now available from CorbettReport.com for $20 US. That includes shipping and handling anywhere in the world. It's 2 discs. It's the 3-hour documentary in complete form here. So that is a valuable resource as well. And I, as always, highly encourage you to make copies of this and hand it out to everyone and anyone, friends and neighbors and coworkers and total strangers and anyone else who you think might be receptive to this information, because this is a huge, huge topic, and no one of us has all the pieces to this puzzle. It is only through all of us coming at this material from our different perspectives and experiences with our different knowledge bases that we'll be able to really construct the big picture of what's happening here. So, as I say, lots more coming on this material in the coming weeks and months to help flesh this out at CorbettReport.com. But in the meantime, please do go to CorbettReport.com/bigoil for all of the information regarding this documentary. I think it's the most important information that we can be talking about right now, and I hope that you'll join me in that conversation at CorbettReport.com/bigoil. Thank you.